The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
When the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, they got together, and to disconcert him, one of them put a question. Master, which is the greatest commandment of the law? Jesus said, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and the first commandment. The second resembles it. You must love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang the whole law and the prophets also. The Gospel of the Lord. One by one, Jesus kneels on the floor in front of each disciple. One by one, the water of his love washes over the feet of each disciple. No one is left out. Judas, Peter, and the other 10 of them. All are washed, all are loved. And after doing that, Jesus reminded his disciples, I have set you an example that you should do as I have done to you. By his example and command, we are to remove the shoes, sandals, and socks of another, receive their feet, their life into our hands and wash. We are to remove our shoes and socks or sandals, place our feet, our life into the hands of another and be washed. This is the way of Christ, the way of love. It is a choice. It is a decision, not just for today, but every day and every night, not just in the liturgy, but also outside the liturgy. This act is not simply a choice to whether to wash feet, but a choice to love or not to love. Jesus chose to love. Not some, but all. That is the choice before us. We cannot choose to love only those whom we like, whom we deem deserving, or for whom we have good feelings. Those who look, think, or act like us. It is all or nothing. If we do not love all, we love none. Love for Jesus is not about feelings and emotions, but about a choice, a decision that one has to make. In Jesus' teaching, if you have feet, you get washed. regardless of who they are, where those feet have been, or where they are going. That is the example and commandment he sets before his disciples and us. And this morning, my dear friends, we echo the very words of Jesus when he gave the two commandments for us to follow. And we are told in today's gospel text, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And the commandment does not stop there. It continues. The second greatest commandment, and that is you must love your neighbor as yourself. In other words, my dear sisters and brothers, to love God and to love neighbor is a decision, is a choice that one has to make. When we make a decision to love God, or when we make a decision to love our neighbor, the words of Jesus are being said of us. You are blessed if you do them. In John's Gospel, chapter 13, verse 17. When we love God, when we love our neighbor, the words of Jesus will be fulfilled in our lives. You are blessed. You are blessed. I am blessed. We all are blessed if we do them. And that is the challenge, my dear friends, this morning as we celebrate the 30th Sunday of Ordinary Time. But before we can move on to the second commandment, you and I, we need to make a decision to love God. Sometimes you may think that you love God, but it may not be actually. When you truly experience the love of God, when you truly experience what God has done for you, when you have truly accepted and acknowledged, only then you can move on to the second commandment. Because without loving God with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our mind, we will not be able to love our neighbor, especially when our neighbor whom we do not like, whom we avoid, whom we do not want to have any kind of relationship. So to love is a choice. To love is a decision. And it reminds me of a story of a young manager who was to replace a retiring executive. The younger man approached the older, venerated leader and asked, "Sir, I know of the legend that you have become as a leader in this company. Can you give me some advice as I try to fill your shoes?" The older man pondered the question and responded, 3 words. Make good decisions. That is good advice. The young man replied as he wrote this down. And what is the key to making good decisions? 1 word. The veteran exec replied. Experience. And how do I get this? The eager young man asked as he scribbled experience on his paper. 2 words. The retiring man answered, bad decisions. Richard Petty, an Ohio State University psychologist, estimates that each of us is faced with hundreds of decisions each day. They range from trivial matters like local food or Western food, to moral, good from evil, to priority, best from better. In these decisions, we want to make good choices. Why? Because we are the sum total of our decisions. We make our decisions and our decisions make us. As someone once said, be careful of the choices you make today. They will become your lifestyle tomorrow. Yes, my dear friends, each day we face choices regarding to walk with God. Each day we face the choices whether to love or not. We can choose to love or not to love. We can choose whether we want to give a half-hearted love for God or a full-hearted love for God. We can choose. When you are at a wedding, the bride and groom say to each other, I choose you above everybody else in the world. And I choose you for the rest of my life. That's a choice. That's a decision the bride and the groom decided. We can choose to love God. We can choose to love God. We can choose to love God half-heartedly. But God is not going to force us to do that. We can thumb our nose at God and go to a totally different way. God is not going to force us to love Him, because love is a choice. Love is a decision. Love cannot be forced. It is a choice we make. Even when you do choose to love someone, it doesn't mean everything will become perfect, especially when we talk about loving our neighbor. It doesn't even mean that person will accept your love. But you are the only person who can stop you from loving someone else. Because love is a choice. Love is a decision. Morgan Scott Peck, in his book, The Road Less Traveled, he said, genuine love is volitional rather than emotional. The person who truly loves does so because of a decision to love. This person has made a commitment to be loving whether or not the loving feeling is present. Whether or not the loving feeling is present. True love is not a feeling by which we are overwhelmed. It is a committed, thoughtful decision. What Scott Peck is saying is that love is a committed, thoughtful decision to love and serve both God and our neighbor. This love compels us to work for the well-being of others, even if it means sacrificing our own well-being. My dear friends, I don't know what work of love there is for you and me to do. But I know there is someone who needs our love. And that someone could also be God, actually. Not necessarily it has to be a fellow human. But sometimes we need to ask ourselves, with all honesty, whether we truly love God with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our mind, or we just give bits and pieces when we have the time, or when I have the time. Yes, my dear sisters and brothers, there is someone who needs our love. Not just someone who's easy to love, someone who is hard to love also needs our love. And that is the tricky part of love, the most difficult part. But by the grace of God, we don't have to do this on our own. In fact, we can't do this by ourselves. We need God's grace and strength to love others. The one who calls us to love one another is also the one who will enable us to do it. But even before you move to love the other, first and foremost, you have to make a decision to love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And that is important, my dear friends, because when we truly love God with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our minds, it will help us to move on to the second commandment, to love our neighbor. And I remember this very strongly in one of the encounters that Jesus had with Peter. Remember what Jesus said to Simon Peter at the post-resurrection event? Peter, do you love me? Peter has to make a personal declaration. Jesus is not entrusting Peter, take care of my sheep, take care of my lambs, until and unless he wanted to hear Peter saying, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus wanted to hear that. Only then Peter was given the trust, the responsibility, after he had personally declared his personal love for Jesus. My dear friends, Peter and Jesus, they had this conversation around a charcoal fire. If you read St. John's Gospel, the particular Greek word for charcoal fire is used only one place in the New Testament, in John's Gospel, chapter 18, verse 18, where Peter denied the Lord in the courtyard. There was a charcoal fire there in the courtyard where Peter denied the Lord. By one fire, he says, I don't know him. By another fire, he says, in John's Gospel, chapter 21, Lord, you know I love you. By one charcoal fire, he denied Christ. By one charcoal fire, Peter openly declared his love for Christ. My dear friends, what about you? What about me? What about all of us? Remember the gospel this morning. The greatest commandment is you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And then the second commandment, you must love your neighbor as yourself. So we need to ask ourselves, do I wholeheartedly love this God whom I adore? To love Him with all my heart, to love Him with all my soul, to love Him with all my mind. When we can say that, then we are prepared to move on to the second commandment. Without the first, you can't love your neighbor. It's impossible. When you don't experience the love of God in your lives, you will never able to experience or share that love with another. It's impossible. It's impossible. And that is why at the end of everything, what is asked of us is this. There are 3 qualifications for those who would serve the Lord. 3 qualifications. The first is love. The second is love. The third is love. First we love, then we serve. First we love, then we speak. First we love, then we lead. It is like that. And that is why we need to examine and see our love for God. Do we wholeheartedly love God? That is very important for us to ask. So let us ask God to give us the strength and the grace to be with us throughout this whole week as we ponder on God's word this morning.